Welcome to the Illinois Divorce Guide podcast, where we break down the complex and emotional process of divorce into manageable, easy-to-understand steps. I'm your host, Greer Howard, and with me is Bobby Buchanan, widely recognized as one of Illinois' top divorce attorneys, offering unmatched insight and experience in family law. Well, Bobby, it is great to be back with you today, and we've got a topic that is going to be very interesting. We are going to be talking about business and divorce. And, so often when we are thinking about going through a divorce, we're thinking about the personal side, and maybe you're thinking about your home, your maybe your retirement account, your savings account, things like that. But a lot of people own their own business. And so now we kind of have two sides of this divorce. We've got your personal side, but then also you have this business that, is providing for your livelihood. So, Bobby, why don't you start us out today with kind of just some things to consider when you own a business and you're going through a divorce?
Yeah, Greer, good to see you and good to do this episode. This is certainly one that hits close to home. I am a business owner. My law firm is the business, and it's a business that I started before the marriage, and we'll talk about kind of the relationship between the timing of your business starting and when you got married and how that plays into all of it. But I can speak from personal experience that this thing means a lot to me. I've poured my heart and soul into it and I built it from nothing. And it's really, besides my family, it's something that's really near and dear to me because ultimately it's what feeds my family. So thinking about what would happen with this business, how we would divide this business, how much of this business is mine and how much it is my wife's. Those are all some really big questions that I would have to answer if I was getting divorced. So I think there's a lot to cover here, and hopefully we can give everybody some insight as we dive through and navigate this topic.
Yeah. Well, let's first start out with, is a business marital property?
Great question. So, and I'm going to give you a lawyer's favorite answer, which is it depends. It depends on a few different things. So, on a very basic level, let's give the viewers and the listeners a reminder of what is marital and what is not marital. So, marital property is the stuff that's actually going to be divided in this divorce. Non-marital, you get to keep. We don't have to worry about that as far as dividing it. What is marital? Marital is the stuff that is acquired during the marriage. And acquired can mean a few different things, because sometimes a piece of property that is non-marital may acquire value during the marriage. So that's what we need to look at as far as the business goes. So the short answer is a business is going to be marital if it's created after the marriage. It's going to be non-marital if it's created before, but there could be a marital component to the business even if it started before the marriage.
Okay. Well, maybe we could do a little hypothetical here, Bobby. So let's say that you started a financial planning firm before the marriage and your spouse stayed home with the kids while you built it. Now, this is actually kind of similar to your situation. I believe you started your firm before you were married. Then you married
Right.
beautiful Kathleen. You started your lovely family. And now, now what? She stayed home with the kids. So what does that look like if you were to go through a divorce?
Yeah, so what this looks like for us is that most likely I started this business, I think, in 2016. We got married in 2017. So the majority of the business growth has been after the marriage. And it's been the reason it has grown has been because of my active efforts in growing the business and building my network and in compiling a team and doing all the things that are required to grow a business. That's been on the business side what's grown the effort. And then if we look on Kathleen's side, what has actually allowed me to do that has been her contribution to the marital estate, if you will, in taking care of everything else. I'm very fortunate that in our marriage, we have a good understanding of, what my quote unquote job is and what her job is. And every marriage is different. And I think, there are people where there's two professionals and that works for them, and they get more outside help for daycare and taking care of the kids. There's people, I would say, fall more into the traditional category where there's one breadwinner and there's the other person that's doing more of the heavy lifting as far as raising the kids. But the courts don't really care. They don't say, well, Bobby was the one who did all the work here, so he's going to get the majority of the business. They look at her contributions, as they should. And I'm not just saying this, I truly believe this. Her contributions to the marriage and to the family as equally valuable. So in our situation and in the situation of the hypothetical, the vast majority of the business is going to be deemed, or the value of the business is going to be deemed marital, and we're going to have to figure out how to divide it.
Okay, so that kind of like leads us into maybe the specifics of how do you value a business? How do you even come up with what a business is worth so that you can then decide, okay, well, who kind of gets what through this process?
Yeah, so this whole topic, business valuation, dividing a business in divorce, this could probably and maybe an entire series that we do, a little mini series on this topic, because we could dive so deep on all of this stuff. So in this episode, we're going to kind of hit the high notes, and then in future episodes, we'll get a business valuation expert on to talk to them about how this is done in practice. But I'll give you the quick overview here. So when I alluded to business valuation expert, that's the person that's going to be coming in and really helping everybody see what is the value of this business, how much of this business is marital, how much of this business is non-marital, and figuring out, the number side of it so we can start to negotiate. So to dive in on that, there's going to be three approaches to value the business. There's going to be the market approach, where we say, okay, Bobby's got a divorce law firm. Let's compare his law firm to other law firms that we maybe know the value of, maybe other law firms that have been sold, compare his metrics to their metrics and come up with a value for it. Then there can be the other method would be more of a cash flow or an income approach, where we're looking at how profitable is this law firm, how much cash is it generating per year, per quarter, whatever the time period is relevant to the valuation expert. And then the third one, which is less relevant to professional services businesses, but maybe relevant if they own, a certain amount of commercial property, which is the asset approach. That's going to be more relevant to capitally intensive businesses, say like a construction company or something, or a trucking company where you actually own stuff that could be sold and appears on a balance sheet. So those are the three approaches that the valuation expert may use. And then it's up to the parties to take their report and negotiate with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So those are all really great things to kind of think about when you're, sort of curious of like, how would your business be valued? And I love that an expert's coming in to actually do that work so that it's really clear what the valuation is. And so let's do another hypothetical here, Bobby. Let's say that you're an architect and you're running a solo firm and all the income stays in the business and you take a small draw, but you also expense your car, travel, and meals. Your spouse's attorney wants a full forensics analysis. So what happens next?
Yeah, this is pretty common, where one person is running the business and they are maybe not doing a great job of separating business expenses from personal expenses. They're taking a draw, but it's not quite reflective of what their income should or would be if they were an actual employee of the business. So the other side says, hey, wait a minute, we can't do a fair valuation of this, or we can't set maintenance because we don't really know what his income really is. At that point, what's going to happen is there's probably going to be formal discovery that's initiated where they're sending the other office requests for all the documentation related to the business. And this can be pretty intensive and take a long time and be expensive. And then the business valuation expert gets involved and they start doing different sorts of reports. They could do a valuation report. They could do a retained income report where they're looking at how much income is actually being retained in the business, but should be counted towards the owner. So there's a lot of different things that could happen. And one other thing to keep in mind as far as the valuation experts is most of the time, you're just going to have one valuation expert because they are so expensive and it's so time consuming. And it'll be that expert will be appointed as a neutral by the court. But that doesn't stop you on your side. You can hire your own expert. Let's say you don't like how the report comes back from the court appointed expert and you want your expert to offer their insights and create some leverage for negotiation. That is an option as well. But again, this is only going to make sense if your business is worth a certain amount and there's enough to gain by getting that second expert. So those are going to be some significant strategic decisions and talks you're going to have with your attorney and your law firm as you go through this process.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. I want to clarify because we've talked about discovery in the past. And so this is a different, so it's discovery as in the same process, but there is often discovery for your personal finances, which we've talked about previously. And this is a separate discovery, correct? This is a separate discovery for your business, right? So this is a lot of discovery going on, Bobby.
Yes, it is a lot of discovery, and dividing businesses can get very paperwork intensive, especially in contentious cases. That being said, you can have cases, and we've had many cases where there are significantly large businesses, but the parties, because they didn't get really nasty during the divorce, they both wanted it to stay amicable, were able to figure it out relatively easily. You know, they may have gotten a business valuation expert. He told the parties, okay, I need these high level documents, you know, maybe income statements and balance sheets for the last few years. And our client did a great job of keeping their books while they were running their business. They had clean books, good financials, and the valuation expert was able to use these reports and come up with a very fair valuation. Both parties wanted to be pragmatic about it. And so with that, they were able to divide the business. So even though it can be incredibly paper intensive, it doesn't have to.
Yeah, I love that. I always love when you bring that up, that it doesn't have to go that way. You know, there's two types of businesses that have kind of come to my mind that I'm curious about your thoughts. What about if it's a family business? Let's say that one of the spouses works in a family business that maybe their grandfather, their father, or their great grandfather started. And is how does that work in a divorce? And is that considered the marital property, or is that actually not because it was started from a family member way before they were even together?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. And really what we have to look at is, does the party to the divorce, do they have any ownership stake in this company? And it has to be more than just a family agreement, you know, and this stuff can get really tricky because in certain families and certain cultures, they don't do things in black and white and they don't have contracts. You know, a lot of it is done verbally. It's done by custom. It's done by just generational trust. And if that's the case, unless you have a very clear document saying this person has some ownership stake in this company or this business, or maybe there is some documented verbal agreement and still that's going to be tricky, you really need some sort of ownership document, operating agreement, something like that, their name, you know, them actually being part of the LLC or them having shares of the business, something like that. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult to, if not impossible, to convince a judge that any of this business is marital. That's something that people just need to be aware of as they go through this process. Like, set your expectations in the right place, because if you go into this thinking, oh, I want a share of that family business, or at least I want an offset from that, and that is just not legally possible, you're going to be spinning your wheels. You're going to be hiring and firing lawyers, looking for the one that is going to get you what you want, looking for the one that's going to tell you what you want to hear rather than what you need to hear. And it's just going to cost you a lot more time and aggravation and money than it needs to.
Do you ever see, or is it common for, if someone does have a family business, it's been around for generations, and it is, a profitable company, do they, are prenups a part of that, conversation ever when family members are getting married?
Absolutely. I mean, in some families, especially families of considerable wealth, a prenup is something that is almost, the family is going to be very upset if you don't get a prenup, because if you have some sort of ownership stake, or you're set to get some ownership stake in this family business, it's like you're giving half of it away to your spouse. And that can be really hard for a family who's worked for generations to build wealth and build the value of this business. So we see prenups in this context a lot. And at a minimum, going through the prenup exercise is a good idea with your spouse. Even if you don't get a prenup, at least going down that road is, almost internally first, to understand, okay, I need to know that if I'm getting married here and I'm going to be working hard to grow this business, I'm going to be most likely giving half of it away. And for me, I don't know, maybe I'm a hopeless romantic. Maybe I just, it's a very personal thing. I never would have considered a prenup. It's just, it's so foreign to me. I think everybody kind of grows up in a different culture as far as like whether they do a prenup or don't. We are experiencing, I think, this current generation, the younger folks that are coming to us for prenups. It's more, I think they see it more just as responsible than anything. Like, I don't think it's such a sticking point as it used to be. So a lot of younger couples are coming in with prenups, getting prenups. So at least they're talking through what's going to happen if we do get divorced.
Yeah, I mean, coming from my perspective, Bobby, of being someone who is divorced, I see it more that way. I wish that it was part of, when you get married, you also have to talk about, you also have to sign something that says, we're under, you understand that also these things are going to happen if it doesn't last.
Yeah.
Because everybody gets married thinking, it's going to work out, but it would be nice to know, to sign something to say, hey, if it doesn't work out, this is what it looks like unless you have a prenup. And maybe people would just make a different decision if they could see, what they're agreeing to as far as like financially with their business and all of that. I think it could be helpful.
Absolutely. I think it's kind of insane that you don't have to sign some sort of waiver when you get married. I mean, you really just need to sign your name, and it would seem like it would, for how many rights and responsibilities that I got to sign a 20-page document if I want to take my kids to like the trampoline park.
Oh,
But if
yeah.
I want to go get married to someone I literally just met.
Yeah. Just say I do.
Just say I do, and you're done. Like, there could just be a one pager that lays out, this is how marital property works, this is how custody works, just so people know. Because I think that people would probably pause a little bit when they're about to sign their marriage thing, like, oh, wait a minute, you're gonna get half, or you could get half of everything that what this business is. Like, maybe we should talk to a financial advisor about this, or maybe we should talk to a lawyer, just to get, because if you're learning about that and then it makes you pause and want to think about it, I think that's better than people just going into this.
Sure. Because then you go into your marriage a little more educated, right? And
Yeah.
you're not just assuming that everything's going to work out because you're in love. So I don't know. I might have to do some research on that, Bobby. I think this might be a new thing I want to I want to get behind.
Hey, there could be a business here. I'm just trying to think when you do get married, if you sign off on something, like what it does is I think it just opens the conversation for the prenup.
Sure.
If you had this waiver and you didn't want to sign it, then it's like, okay, we'll go have a discussion about a prenup, because you can change the rules with a prenup. And that's why people do it. They say, well, I don't really want to sign into the Illinois state rules on divorce, so let's go to a lawyer and make our own rules. And you can do that with a prenup to a certain degree.
Which then could, like, flip the script of the feelings of it, because sometimes people feel like, "Oh, you're getting a prenup because you think we're not going to make it," and it's like, "No, we're getting a prenup because that's what's smart and that's what's
Yeah.
responsible," and it's not that you don't want people to get married, of course, but you just if it doesn't go well, everybody is clear about what it's going to look like. So, and if that's the case, some people may be more inclined to get divorced and other people may be more inclined just to stay married based off of those consequences.
Absolutely. And having the prenup discussion, or just learning about how marital property works, gets people talking about finances. I mean, like, you could go into a marriage thinking like, oh yeah, we're going to have a joint bank account and that's just how we're going to do our money. And then you talk to the other person, separately, and they say, no, we're going to have our own bank accounts. Like, my parents didn't mix their bank accounts. We're going to keep our own. And some people learn that like after they get married, which is just kind of insane to me. But, you know, and obviously this is not in my best interest to fix all these problems, but I'm not in the divorce. I'm not in the divorce business because I actually like marriages going downhill. I like to help people kind of get whole again and realize, like, kind of learn from their mistakes and move on. So if I can help people enter into marriages with a better foundation, I'm going to sleep better at night. If I can help people get through divorce more smoothly and keep their family as intact as possible as far as co-parenting, I'm going to sleep better at night. So there's a lot of things we could do here. Yeah.
Well, Bobby, there might be a potential new branch of your business, so look into that and get back to me sometime soon, because I think that could be really smart for people. Now, I have one more question that I think there's probably some other people out there that could benefit from, as far as going back to divorce when you own a business. Let's talk about someone, honestly, more like myself. So I'm in a business, like, I have a business for everything that I do, but it all involves me, right? Because I am the product. So there may be people who own like a lawn care business and they actually go out and they do all of the lawn work themselves.
Yeah.
It's the person that
Yeah.
owns a business, but that business really only works with that person. And if that person was to go away, that business really isn't going to be able to survive on its own. So what are maybe some things to think about, if that's the type of, business that you maybe own?
Yeah, those sorts of businesses are definitely valued differently, and it can be a lot simpler in that context, where you're just looking at, okay, what is this party's income? And it's treated much more closely just as a kind of a job, like you've created your own job, because there's no way for you to sell your business. No one can run your business without you. And there's a lot of, even law firms, like solo law firms where it's just the lawyer doing the work. It's the same sort of thing. There's not any kind of inherent value to that business without the owner of the business. So those sorts of situations can be a lot simpler to figure out, a lot less messy as far as the paperwork goes, and looking at the valuation. So
Okay.
that is one of the assessments that a good business valuator is going to do, is assess what is the owner's kind of goodwill value or inherent value in the business. And that's going to play a part in how things are divided.
Okay, great. Well, I'm sure there's some people out there. There's a couple different things we talked about, today, because obviously all, businesses have different nuances. But, I guess before we go, maybe we could quickly talk about, let's say, I guess the option is when you're going through this is either you keep the business or
Yeah.
you don't keep the business, right? I mean, those are kind of the two options. Um, I'm assuming most people would probably want to keep their business if they're making money from it. So, what are a couple of those just kind of high level view, things that people could do, or what does it look like to be able to keep your business, but also, get your spouse whatever they deserve in this situation?
So we have gotten to the place where we've gotten the business valuation, we figured out a value to the business, and now it's like, okay, what do we do with that? Um, if you are the operator of the business, you want to keep operating it, but your spouse is entitled to some of the marital value, what do you do? So one is there can be a buyout. So you're going to have to figure out, how am I going to buy out my spouse from their portion of the business? Um, and maybe there's enough liquidity in your marital estate that you can do that. You have the cash, where there's some sort of cash equalization payment that can be made so you can get full interest in the business after the divorce. The other thing would be an offset. So maybe your spouse is going to get the house and the retirement accounts, and you keep the business. And maybe that's fair overall, depending on the cash flow and profitability and the whatever the value of the business is, as far as the assets, however you're valuing it. You may decide that's actually a good deal for you. Your spouse doesn't want to deal with the business at all. They'd rather have the house and the retirement accounts, and it could be a quote unquote win-win. And then one of the other options is that they would get some sort of shares in the business, but without any sort of decision-making authority. These would be shares that might vest at a certain time, or that they could sell back to you later. There's a lot of different creative options to do this. Those options can be expensive because we're probably going to need to hire a separate attorney to craft that sort of agreement, make sure that language is good. But we can get creative depending on what type of business it is.
Okay. Well, Bobby, we've covered a lot today, and this is a really interesting conversation about business for business owners out there that are potentially going through divorce. And honestly, I feel like there's kind of a couple of additional conversations, or maybe some other episodes that we can roll out to get into a little bit more of the details. But, as we wrap up today, anything you just kind of want to say about the subject of when you own a business and you're going through a divorce?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that if there ever was a reason besides kids to keep your divorce pragmatic and non-emotional, it's when you have business. Because if things get volatile, the discovery can be endless, the fighting can be endless. It's going to make it so you can't operate your business as effectively because you're so stressed out over the divorce. So it's a perfect reason to try to get through your divorce as amicably, pragmatically as possible. So collaborative divorce, mediation, a negotiated agreement, these sorts of things are really key when you have a business.
Awesome. Well, Bobby, thanks as always for all of your insight and advice today. And I look forward to talking to you again next week.
Thank you for listening to the Illinois Divorce Guide podcast. We hope today's episode gave you clarity and support as you move forward on your journey. If you found this episode helpful, please subscribe, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform. Tune in next week for more insights and expert advice on the Illinois Divorce Guide podcast.